Hello, hello. I'm Claire Snowden-Darling, founder of Balanced Wellness and the head of the College of Functional Kinesiology. And I am talking to you today. One of the subjects that we've been asked to talk about is why am I crying all the time? So I'm an alternative health expert and I specialize in stress and hormones and also emotional transformation. So I want to talk to you about this from the different aspects. And the first thing I really do want to say is one of my favorite quotes from Marianne Williamson, which is, if we're not depressed at the moment, we're not paying attention. And I think that's a really interesting point. So first of all, I kind of want to say that we are in very extenuating times and a lot of people are feeling very challenged by them. So at the moment, we're dealing with a lot of loss of control, all the fear in the news. I mean, it's just incredible, just tuning in. I check the headlines once a day and it's just unreal, the amount of fear that is being put out into the world. A lot of uncertainty, of course, around jobs and the way the world's going to be. People have actually lost people, so actual bereavements. People who have long COVID are having to deal with loss of quality of life, and we're also grieving a way of life, and that isn't that might be the least of anybody's issues, but it's still a really big deal. So moving through these times without feeling something would be really unusual. And ultimately, we don't have a manual of how to deal with this. So we've kind of been thrown in at the deep end. And a lot of people, they're coming into clinic, a lot of people are reporting on social media that they are crying all the time. So I wanted to talk about the reasons why we would be crying all the time. And I mean, obviously, like I just said, we're in crazy times, but some of these reasons are physical and some of them are emotional. And by physical, I'm talking biochemical. So actual biochemical reasons why we would feel more emotional. So some of the reasons are imbalanced blood sugars, this lack of control and fear, that's a real biggie, thyroid imbalances, and also imbalances with our female hormones. So I'm going to talk about them because when a client comes in and says to me that they're crying all the time, I instantly think of thyroid and hormones. So let's start there. So let's start with the thyroid. What is the thyroid? Well, the thyroid is a gland from the endocrine system and it lives in the throat, the front of the neck here. And its main job, it produces hormones that regulate our body's metabolism, so our metabolic rate. And it also does quite a lot of controlling heart, muscle, and digestive functions. So predominantly metabolism, digestion. Interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people have IBS, a lot of people struggle with weight. So this is, thyroid is definitely implicated in quite a few things. It's also important for brain development and bone health. So its correct functioning depends on adequate iodine from our diet. And as with all of the minerals in our food, the iodine is really depleted in our soil. So we actually have a situation where a vast number of women are walking around with subclinically imbalanced thyroids. And therefore, a lot of the issues that we're seeing are because the thyroid really need help. So the thyroid has a big job when it comes to regulating periods. So it has a little conversation with the ovaries and make sure that our menstrual cycle is regulated. And whilst a lot of people talk about thyroid issues, I have clients coming in saying, I've got an underactive thyroid or I've got an overactive thyroid, and that can definitely be an issue too. That's an autoimmune disease. I truly have experienced, my clinical experience shows that actually the thyroid is a victim of adrenal fatigue. So it's when we're so busy rushing around or in so much stress and overwhelm that our thyroid isn't given the opportunity to do its job properly. So I have a little story about this. And my little story goes, it's about the endocrine system. So in our endocrine system, we have got, the first one isn't actually to do, it's not a gland. So our endocrine system is our glandular system. So at the top of the endocrine system, it's kind of lumped in there, but it's actually not a gland. We have our hypothalamus, and our hypothalamus is actually where our nervous system sort of all connects. And it's like the chief operating room of our nervous system. Then just below that, so that's receiving all the information from our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, our senses. So that would be a case of if you smell smoke, you go, okay, danger, or you touch something that's hot, you're getting that information. It's external dangers and stresses that our hypothalamus reacts to. Then just below that, you have your pituitary gland. So if you were to put go straight down and straight back, you get to your pituitary gland. And your pituitary gland is actually the leader of the orchestra. It runs the whole endocrine system. So it's receiving information from inside our bodies about, am I hungry? Do I need a wee? Am I cold? Those kind of things, like from an internal perspective, not an external perspective. And the pituitary gland is also the gland that tells other glands what to do. And then we have our pineal gland, which is to do with light and dark, melatonin and serotonin, so our sleep and waking cycles, also mineral balances in the body is the pineal gland. And then we have the thyroid, which I've said is metabolism, periods, digestion. We also have the parathyroid, which is to do with levels of magnesium and calcium. We have our thymus, which is to do with immune functions. It's our immune gland. And then we have the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys. And then at the very sort of bottom of the food chain, we have our ovaries and testes. And these are all supposed to have a little conversation. They all have a job to do, and they all have to play their part so that the orchestra sounds good. But what tends to happen is the pituitary and the hypothalamus are having this conversation. Why is it whenever I do a talk, my dog decides to play with a bone on hard floor? It's just every time I do a talk, always. I even hit them the other day. We still got hold of one. So what happens is the pituitary gland will be having this conversation with the other glands. So it will say something like, this is an absolute translation. It doesn't say this at all. It does it all with hormones and chemical messages, but let's just pretend. It would say something like, so thyroid, it's time to tell the ovaries to get ready for a bleed. So I want you to make all the hormones to send that message. Are we called to do that? And the thyroid's like, yeah, we're called to do that. And then the pituitary goes, well, hang on a minute. Before you do that job, I'm just going to check with the adrenal glands that there's no saber-toothed tigers behind us. Because if there are saber-toothed tigers chasing after us, it's a little bit more important to get out of the way of the saber-toothed tigers than to start, a menstrual cycle. So the thyroid goes, okay, well, I'll wait for you to tell me. And so the pituitary gland checks in with the adrenal glands and goes, hey guys, are we chill? And the adrenal glands go, no, there's saber-toothed tigers everywhere. And to an adrenal gland, saber-toothed tiger could be sort of emotional stress, too much caffeine. It can be food intolerance, sugar, alcohol, toxic chemicals, uncertainty, homeschooling, the wrong exercise at the wrong time of day, depleted soils causing lack of minerals so that we're nutritionally depleted. All of these things are ways in which our adrenal glands will think that there's actually a load of saber-toothed tigers behind us. That's the modern day equivalent. So the adrenal glands go, no, I've got all this to deal with. I've got to keep us alive. And so the pituitary will go, okay, well, thyroid, hold off. Don't do that particular job. So after a while, thyroid sat there going, well, I'm on hold. And now I'm on hold, but you're also not feeding me properly because I haven't got enough iodine. And so the thyroid basically just stops doing this job. So the thyroid is a real victim of adrenal stress. So when people are coming in saying, I've got an underactive thyroid, I'm like, and let's talk about the stress in your life, and let's talk about what can be causing stress in your life. As an aside, I go on and on and on about chemical toxicity, but our skin, so the stress hormones that our adrenal glands makes, it makes adrenaline and it makes cortisol, the stress hormone. But that's not the only place that makes cortisol. Our skin also makes cortisol in response to toxicity. Like, our body is so under stress and we don't even know it. So it's this huge, huge conversation, you know, that happens in our endocrine system, and then the thyroid becomes depleted. And so another thing that I think of with thyroid depletion is thinning hair, sleep issues, like I said, crying all the time, exhaustion, and behind that is usually adrenal fatigue. Now, the reason for that is, let's go back to our little story about our endocrine system. We go back to our hypothalamus and our pituitary because they kind of work together. Now, when we're under stress, and let's just review what I meant by stress. We can be talking about food intolerance, the wrong diet, alcohol, chemical toxicity, uncertainty, homeschooling. You know, it's like literally our lives right now: alcohol, sugar, all of the things. What happens is, in response to that, so either external pressure or internal, you know, stress, our hypothalamus and our pituitary glands will send a memo down to the adrenal glands saying, please, can you make some stress hormone? We really need the stress hormone. And the adrenal glands go, yeah, okay, I'll make the stress hormone. And then after it's put the stress hormone, cortisol, into the bloodstream, a memo comes back up to the pituitary and the hypothalamus and says, I've done it, guys. Stop sending the message. But that was in response to the coffee you had 20 minutes ago, or the kids shouting, or the dog's barking. And so now is another thing. So you've eaten a biscuit or something else has happened. So now they send the message again. And this message just happens all the time. And so after a while, the feedback loop, this stop sending the memo, gets switched off. So that's actually a condition called HPA, hypothalamus pituitary adrenals, HPA axis dysregulation. And it's something that's completely overlooked by the medical model, and in my experience is behind most chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and also inflammatory conditions in the body, which is all of them. All conditions pretty much come back to an inflammatory response. So HPA axis dysregulation is a really huge deal, and a big cause of symptoms in the body. Also, when we have this level of stress hormone in our body, guess what? We are going to be in anxiety. We're going to be in overwhelm. We're literally waiting for the tap on our shoulder. We're in fear. We're just like on edge, like literally wired and on edge. So we're going to be crying all the time. So it's really important to learn how to work on our stress. And I used to like laugh at that. Ha ha ha. I was like a total, you know, red personality, and I was dealing with 18 projects at a time. And yes, I've got a 3-year-old, and yes, I'm building a house, and yes, I'm running a business, and yes, I'm teaching up in London all the time, and yes, I'll organize this party, and da 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 da. And I didn't even realize that I was stressed, because I just thought I was thriving. And it took stripping out almost everything in my life, because my health made me. I physically couldn't do anything when I went into early menopause, and I went into early menopause because of shock and trauma to my adrenal glands. I couldn't do anything, and so it was only by stripping everything out of my life that I then started to realize even small things I find stressful, and I'd learned how to railroad over that. So when we are in a place of adrenal fatigue, we will make decisions to keep us in a place of adrenal fatigue. Stress begets stress, and that's a really important one. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to work on our stress. Well, this is, you know, what mindfulness is all about. We can also support our diet. So when we're in a blood sugar roller coaster, so we've eaten something that's high carbohydrate, our blood sugars rise, then they drop, and we produce stress hormone, and then they rise and we produce insulin, and then they drop and we produce cortisol. And so we need to learn how to balance our blood sugars, and we do that by eating proteins, fats, and carbs at every meal. Taking magnesium. Magnesium is essential for blood sugar stabilization, for thyroid health, for adrenal health, for digestive health, for mood, all of these things. Now, the right magnesium is important, and I tend to think of magnesium malate. If you get like sort of muscle twitches in your eye, or cramps in your legs, or fatigue in general, I think of magnesium citrate if you're a bit constipated, and magnesium glycinate if you're a bit loose. So glycinate if you need gluing up, citrate with a C if you're constipated, and malate for muscles. That's how I remember it. So let's move on to hormones. So if our hormones are unstable, well, we're going to end up with an unstable mood. Estrogen dominance is a massive issue in our world, and for a variety of reasons. Another thing that happens when we're under stress is our body stops making the hormone progesterone. It's called the pregnenolone steal, which actually is a bit of a weird name for it, but it's, if you ever Google it, it's called the pregnenolone steal. And it's this thing where there's a hormone called pregnenolone. It's a precursor hormone, and it will make progesterone unless there is stress, and then it will decide to make cortisol instead. Now, what happens then is we end up, there's this fine balance in a woman's body between estrogen and progesterone. And what we end up with is too much estrogen because we're not making progesterone. So an awful lot of women's issues, endometriosis, PCOS, PMDD, all of these things can actually be linked back to estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance, of course, is very much typically characterized as perimenopause. And that's when your progesterone drops off and your estrogen does this. But it's this difference in early perimenopause with all the hot flushes and, you know, the insomnia, that's estrogen dominance. So if we're in that place, estrogen dominance will also cause us to feel incredibly overwhelmed because we haven't got the so progesterone's a calming hormone. We haven't got the calming influence of progesterone. So we're going to feel overwhelmed and anxious. Now the dog needs to go out. Honestly, why is it whenever I do a talk, I'll bring you with me. It's not going to stop my flow. Hilarious. I love working from home. So when the way that we're going to deal with estrogen dominance is, again, it's the same things. It's diet, because too much insulin impacting the body, too much cortisol impacting the body increases estrogen. Chemical toxicity, toxic chemicals actually have ingredients in them called endocrine disruptor chemicals, and they are designed, they're hormone disruptors. So we need to learn how to clean out our skincare, our cleaning products, those kind of things. Stopping our exposure to plastics, you know, it's had a lot of press, and being really careful with the pill, you know, the hormonal contraceptions, finding the non-hormonal alternatives, and also, you know, some HRT. It's just too much estrogen. In fact, obesity, you know, it's quite characterized by putting on weight in the breast area, in the hip area, and even in men, it's that kind of moob situation. It's all estrogen dominance. So I've sort of mentioned blood sugars, I've mentioned stress, and I've now mentioned female hormones. And so I like to look at this, I call this the triangle of hormonal health. And so we've got blood sugars, stress hormones, female hormones. And when those are all working together, we feel great physically, we feel really solid emotionally, but we just need, like you imagine like a little stool, we just need one of those little legs to be out of balance, and then the whole thing can start, you know, having a lot more pressure put on it. And we end up being in this place of overwhelm, anxiety, fear-based thinking. So we can, yes, the world is in a crazy place, but we really can take a stand and support ourselves better. So anxiety is linked to food as well. In a carb-heavy diet, there is an awful lot of research that shows, particularly in refined carbohydrates. In a refined carbohydrate diet, the bacteria in our small intestine, in response to carbohydrates, give off what's called endotoxins. And these endotoxins have been found to be in higher numbers of people with depression and suicidal thoughts. So our diet, we're now seeing this gut-brain connection, this direct impact on eating refined carbohydrates and mood. So if we don't want to be anxious, again, we have to be putting in the good proteins, the good fats, and the right carbohydrates. If we're feeling fearful and unfulfilled, this for me is a real sign around being able to do the emotional work, to feel much more autonomous, and to become more in our adult, because then we're not swayed by external forces. It's like, okay, well, all of this can be happening, but I'm okay. I've got me, you know, regardless of what happens, I've got me. So this is where we would do inner child parenting. We'd be listening to our own intuition, guiding ourselves, becoming more sure, putting in boundaries. Boundaries are really important. That the whole point of them is keeping ourselves safe, keeping ourselves protected. Things like stop watching the news that feed the fear, learning how to hold ourselves. This is a really big bit of work that I do in clinic, and also we run an immersive retreat to support women sort of to be able to do this work, the inner child parenting, and also have an online course called Reclaim Your Life, which is a 12-hour course to do the inner child parenting, learn how to deal with anxiety, learn how to deal with fear. And if in the emotional aspect we're in this place of feeling the lack of control, then this for me is actually about kind of the more we go on an emotional development journey, the more we realize that surrender is the only option and control is an illusion. Because that's actually that's emotional intelligence. It's like, you know, one of my favorite quotes is it the Serenity Prayer? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it's the knowing that there are things I cannot change. So how do I learn how to be with that? So Byron Katie says that the source of human suffering is the inability to be with what is. There's something going on and I'm trying to change it. And that's the source of human suffering. So learning how to be with what is actually where we end up in peace. And that takes work. That takes a lot of work. And that's what we do in Reclaim Your Life. So what can we do about it? So what can we do? Because, you know, we are in crazy times. Well, this is also a great time to start learning what we want to do about it. So I've got loads of free information on our website. If you go to balancedwellness.co.uk, there's actually a tab that says free stuff, and there's loads and loads of bits and pieces on there about diet and emotions and all sorts of things. And there's also a lot of low-cost lectures, so things about diet, emotional stuff, like all the stuff I've been talking to you about. There's loads of very low-cost £7 lectures where you can learn more. If you're really interested in the hormone aspect, there's also a really good hormone masterclass, 3-hour hormone masterclass. Learn how to eat right for your body. So we work with a program called PFC, which stands for protein, fats and carbs. And now on our website, we have that available to buy with dozens and dozens and dozens of recipes. People were asking for recipes, so we did them. And if you're not sure about whether or not you have a hormonal or adrenal imbalance, if you go to www.symptomassessor.co.uk, or you can find it through our website, balancedwellness.co.uk, you can actually take a symptom assessor that will tell you what's going on with your hormones. So that's free to do. So that's why we would be crying all the time, because there's a lot going on, and actually our bodies are feeling very unsupported. And it's not just our fault, you know, this isn't a blame situation, but our soils are depleted, our food is nutritionally depleted. Like, it's a big issue. And the bit where I get passionate is because when we know this, we can take more of a stand, because we're educated to know what the right things to do are. And that is absolutely my infinite mission and purpose. So please do get involved on Facebook, Instagram, Balanced Wellness UK, or Claire Snowden Darling Official, and also our website, Balanced Wellness, or clairesnowdendarling.com. And please come back to me with any questions. Thank you so much.